Job? He was a legend in his own time. The old storyteller leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint. Richest man in the land, you see. He had more sheep than you could count, more camels than you could ride, enough oxen to plow 1,000 fields. He was practically dripping with gold. The children, huddled around the firelight, gasped. "He must have been the luckiest man in the world," one of them exclaimed. The storyteller chuckled. Luck had nothing to do with it. Job was a good man, a truly righteous man. He feared God and always did the right thing. He was generous to everyone, always ready to lend a helping hand to those in need. The children imagined a life of unimaginable wealth, endless feasts, luxurious tents, and herds of animals stretching as far as the eye could see. Envy gnawed at them, a fleeting emotion quickly overshadowed by awe. But even the richest man can't escape the notice of the devil. The storyteller continued, his voice dropping to a hushed whisper. One day, Satan appeared before God, sneering and mocking. "Look at this Job," he sneered. "This perfectly good man. He only worships you because you've showered him with blessings. Take away his wealth, his family, his health, and see how long his faith lasts." The children shivered. The idea of a powerful, evil being tempting God was both terrifying and fascinating. God, in his wisdom, allowed Satan to test Job, the storyteller explained. But he warned Satan, "You may touch his possessions, you may even strike him down, but you shall not take his life." The children gasped. Did Satan really hurt Job? They asked, their eyes wide with horror. "Oh yes," the storyteller replied, and it was truly a terrible sight. Job lost everything, his flocks, his herds, his servants, even his beloved children. He was left with nothing but ashes and despair. The joy he once knew was replaced by a deep, agonizing sadness. The children felt a pang of sympathy for Job. They could only imagine the pain and grief he must have endured. But the storyteller continued, his voice softening. Even in his darkest hour, Job did not curse God. He bowed his head and said, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." The children were awestruck. How could anyone remain so faithful after such a terrible ordeal? The storyteller smiled. "That, my children, is the true measure of a righteous man. Job's unwavering faith, even in the face of unimaginable suffering, is a testament to the strength of the human spirit." The children sat quietly, pondering Job's story. They had learned a valuable lesson about faith, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. "You wouldn't believe what happened," Job declared, his voice booming with laughter as he recounted the day's events to his family. "The finest flock of sheep you ever did see, thousands of them grazing peacefully in the fields. A sight to behold, I tell you." His children, wide-eyed with excitement, clustered around him, eager to hear more. His wife smiled, her eyes twinkling with pride. Job, the most prosperous man in the land, was truly blessed. But their happiness was short-lived. A chilling wind swept across the land, carrying with it a wave of terrifying news. First came word that the oxen, plowing the fields, had been savagely attacked by wild animals. Then a messenger arrived breathlessly, announcing that a devastating fire had consumed the sheep. Job, stunned by these sudden misfortunes, could only shake his head in disbelief. But the horrors had only just begun. Another messenger arrived, his face pale with fear, bearing the grim news that a band of raiders had stolen all of Job's camels. Panic began to set in. Job's family, who had moments before been basking in the glow of their father's prosperity, were now gripped by fear and uncertainty. Then, the worst news of all. A final messenger, his voice trembling, delivered the devastating news that Job's children, gathered for a joyous feast, had been tragically killed in a sudden and violent storm. The world seemed to shatter around Job. His laughter, once so vibrant, was replaced by a mournful silence. His wife, overcome with grief, wept uncontrollably. The joy that had filled their home moments before was now replaced by a suffocating wave of despair. Job, sitting amidst the wreckage of his former happiness, felt a profound sense of loss. His heart, once overflowing with gratitude, was now filled with a deep, aching sadness. He sat in the dust, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the world around him seeming to blur and fade. Job, once a beacon of prosperity, now sat amidst the ashes of his former life. Dust clung to his skin, a stark contrast to the fine silks he once wore. His eyes, once bright with laughter, were now hollow and filled with a deep, abiding sorrow. Three figures approached him, their faces etched with concern. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, his closest friends, had come to offer their condolences. They sat with him in silence for a long time, the weight of Job's grief hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Eliphaz, the oldest of the three, broke the silence. "Job," he began, his voice heavy with concern, "we have heard of your suffering. It is truly heartbreaking, but you must understand, these things don't happen without reason." Job, his voice hoarse with grief, scoffed. "Reason? What reason could there be for this? I, who have always been faithful to God, I am now reduced to this, a beggar in my own land." Bildad, a man of logic, tried to offer comfort. "Perhaps," he said, "you have sinned in some way, Job. Perhaps there is some hidden sin you are unaware of." Job bristled. "Sinned? I? How dare you accuse me of such a thing? I have always lived with integrity, always followed the path of righteousness." Zophar, the youngest of the three, spoke next, his voice laced with a chilling certainty. "Perhaps," he said, "this is God's way of punishing you for your pride. You were too proud, Job, too confident in your own righteousness." Job's anger flared. "I am proud of nothing now. I am a broken man, stripped of everything I hold dear. And you, my friends, you come here to lecture me about pride?" The argument raged on, each man clinging to their own beliefs. Eliphaz, with his somber pronouncements about God's justice, Bildad with his unwavering belief in the link between sin and suffering, and Zophar with his cold, accusing words. "I have always walked in the ways of the Lord. I have never wronged anyone. I have always been generous to the poor. I have always honored God in all my ways. Where is your God now, Eliphaz? Where is his mercy, his compassion?" Eliphaz, a man of deep faith, felt a pang of sympathy for his friend. But he also believed in a strict order to the universe, a divine system of rewards and punishments. Job, trapped in a whirlwind of grief, anger, and confusion, found himself increasingly isolated. His friends, meant to offer comfort, had become accusers, their words like daggers to his already wounded soul. He felt abandoned, alone in his suffering, questioning the very existence of the God he had always trusted. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Job, his spirit crushed, stared into the distance, the ashes of his former life a constant reminder of his shattered world. The silence that followed Job's outburst was deafening. Dust swirled around them, kicked up by the wind that seemed to mock their misery. Job felt a deep sense of loneliness, surrounded by those who meant to offer comfort, but instead offered judgment and condemnation. He felt like a stranger in his own land, abandoned by his friends, betrayed by his fate, and forgotten by God. Job's heart was heavy with grief. His children were gone, his wealth was stolen, his body, once healthy and strong, was now covered in painful sores. The pain wasn't just physical. His soul ached as well, like a deep hole that couldn't be filled. Sitting on the ground, surrounded by dust and ashes, Job questioned everything. Why me? Why does God allow this to happen? His mind raced. Fear whispered in his ear. What if this is how it ends for me? The very thought made his heart race. But amidst all the fear, sadness, and anger, Job held on to one thing: his faith. Even though he was confused and heartbroken, he refused to curse God. He knew that something bigger than his pain was at work, though he couldn't see it yet. Then, out of nowhere, something incredible happened. God spoke to Job, not in a gentle voice, but through a storm that swirled around him like a mighty whirlwind. The sky darkened, and the air crackled with power. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Job's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe what was happening. God is speaking to me? Job thought, is this a punishment or something else? And then, in the midst of the storm, God's voice boomed. Who are you to question what I do? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Can you command the stars to shine? Or tell the ocean where to stop? Job's body shivered in fear. The power of God's words felt like a slap to his soul. He had no answers, no clever excuses. All he could do was sit there, trembling. The anticipation in the air was thick. What was God going to say next? God continued, asking Job questions that Job couldn't even begin to answer. Every word made Job feel small and insignificant, but also humbled. In that moment, Job realized something very important. He had been asking the wrong questions. Instead of demanding answers from God, he needed to trust that God had a plan, even if he couldn't see it. As the storm began to settle, Job's disgust at his own pride melted away. He thought he had the right to question God's decisions, but now he understood how foolish that was. Job had spent so much time focused on his own suffering, but now he saw a bigger picture. He wasn't in control of the universe. God was. This realization filled Job with a strange mix of happiness and relief. He had found peace not in the answers he was looking for, but in the understanding that he didn't need to have all the answers. Sometimes the only thing you could do is trust and believe. But the most shocking part was still to come. Job's story was far from over. God's words didn't just stop with an explanation. God promised Job that his life was about to change for the better. The surprise hit Job like a bolt of lightning. God told him, "Your life will be restored. Your wealth, your family, your health, all of it will come back to you better than before." Job couldn't believe his ears. His anticipation skyrocketed. Could this really be true? Was there a chance for him to start over, to rebuild his life from the ashes? And it wasn't just talk. Over time, everything God promised came true. Job's health was restored. His sores disappeared. His wealth was doubled, and he was blessed with a new family. His life became even more amazing than it had been before. The happiness Job felt was overwhelming. He couldn't stop praising God for his mercy. Job had suffered, yes, but through that suffering, he had grown. He had learned the value of patience, trust, and humility. God didn't just heal his body. He healed his heart. Job's story had taken a terrifying, dark turn, but in the end, it was a story of hope. Job had faced unimaginable loss, but through it all, he had learned to trust God and believe in a future beyond his pain. Job's story isn't just about suffering. It's about resilience. It's about the strength we find in ourselves when we think we have nothing left. Job showed us that even in the worst moments, there is always a chance for a comeback. Even in the darkest storms, there is the possibility of a beautiful sunrise. When life seems unbearable, remember Job. His story proves that sometimes, after all the pain, there is still joy waiting for you, bigger and better than you could ever imagine.